Well, I'm back here again with my cousin, Father Andrew Brinkman. I'm Father Kowalczyk. We wanted to talk about something today that's a little bit sensitive. It's nobody's favorite topic. So we it's just like we want.
Bro, we're gonna talk about pornography
Bro, you can't just say pornography.
and masturbation.
Well, you can't just say that.
Well, why not?
Well, bro, because people don't like talking about that.
But that's the point.
That is actually the point. We don't like talking about it, and I mean, there's a certain irony there that, just the statistics that you're always seeing are astronomical. So it's like, I'm not going to go so far to say everybody's doing it, but lots of people are doing it, and how many people we're not talking about it. We're not talking about it.
Right.
In fact, I saw a statistic early on in my priesthood. I mean, who am I kidding? I'm still early on in my priesthood.
Me too, but I'm further along than he is.
That's true. So I saw a statistic early on in my priesthood that said something like 60% of your parishioners are struggling with of Christians across the board, and only 7% of any sort of parish or church or congregation is talking about it at all.
Right.
So that was the thing that got me on right away. I was like, all right, no, we got to talk about this.
Yeah.
We can't not talk about it.
Right.
And what, in your experience working with people in the parish, and so what is at the root of this desire for pornography?
Yeah, and I think that it's really this deep desire that we have for intimacy and for communion. And that in itself is so good. It's holy. It's from God. And what we ultimately long for as humans is intimacy. It's to be loved and to love, to have the felt experience, the lived experience of being in communion with others. And the reason that pornography is so important for us to talk about is because, one, its prevalence, but two, it's a fundamental lie. It's a counterfeit to what we really long for, and that is love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oftentimes I'll tell somebody in the confessional who's really struggling with this, and not just struggling with it, but there's a lot of shame behind it.
Right.
And there's this thought in the back of their mind, like, I should be above this. And I'll sometimes say, really? You should be above the most fundamental and powerful desire that human beings have? No, we can't be above that, but we do need to untwist that lie. We need to stop seeking the counterfeit.
Right, so an important distinction to make is that the desire is good. God created us good. This is the great affirmation of Genesis, the first few chapters of Genesis. It's good. Your desires are good, and we're fallen. And if we don't take into consideration the fallen aspect, that we might actually begin to see the desire itself as something bad. Oh, no, it's not bad. But how we act on it, that determines whether or not it's good or bad. But the desire is good. And as Father mentioned, as you mentioned, the shame around this, which can be suffocating, frankly, is probably the primary reason why we as priests and clergy, and perhaps you as spouses and parents, don't dare touch the subject because of the profound amount of shame that we have around not only pornography, but also other sexually related issues, abuse, early exposure, you name it. This is a very delicate area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of on that note of counterfeit, there's interesting, like, what we can learn from science, and actually we want to fight against this. We really have to understand what's happening. So in the normal cycle of arousal, starts off the same, right? There's this steady, gradual increase, and then you get to a plateau, and there's nowhere to go until climax, right? Climax is the highest point. And then after the climax, there's this steady decline, and all the passions and the hormones are settling down. Now here's the difference. When a husband and a wife come together, and that's their time of marital embrace, the sexual union, the climax comes down into this kind of gentle place, even higher than where they started, because they're still there in relationship. There's this communion. That's what was being longed for. They weren't actually longing for the climax. The orgasm wasn't actually the point. Communion was the point. And when a couple is in communion with each other, and their relationship is good and their communication is good, that steady decline ends much higher than it was. There's this really beautiful peace, and it just settles into that, right? Now, pornography, on the other hand, everything else is exactly the same. The arc, the climax, but then the decline goes like this. And you end up lower than you started. Why? Because at the end of it, you were looking for something that you did not find. You were not looking for a sexual climax. You were looking for communion, and you didn't find it in those pixels on the screen. And you're left empty and shallow and hollow. This is the same thing for people who experience with one-night stands or non-committed relationships. Anything short of the marital embrace really is somewhere lower on the spectrum there, which I think is fascinating. And that's why now I'm down. Now I'm low again. And what am I seeking when I'm low? Communion. Yeah. And so I just do it over again.
Yeah. And it's an interesting to note as well that not only is it just the pixels, but especially when one is engaged in pornography, it's not communion with pixels. I mean, there's the fantasy, the image in the mind, but it's actually communion with oneself. I'm actually turning more into myself when I should be doing something which is drawing me into another. And it just turns me in even more because there was nobody with whom to share it, my wife.
Right. So where in your estimation, why is it so hard to break out of a habitual sin of pornography in particular?
Multiple reasons. One, as you alluded to in the beginning, just how powerful the drive is. And this is not just as easy as, I don't know, taking Pepsi over Coke. I think the other thing to consider is that, one, we need grace, which is the fundamental that's going to get us out of anything, any struggle with sin. But often it's a certain self-reliance and the inability to change one's habits.
Right. So you're saying that we need confession, but is it safe to say, is it fair to say, this almost sounds wrong to say, confession isn't enough?
Confession is not enough. How often it is that somebody is confessing regularly, sometimes multiple times in a week, the sin of pornography and masturbation. And that pattern, unfortunately, as you know, lasts months, years.
Decades. And sometimes a man or woman will just get complacent with it and say, well, I can't break it, so I just keep going to confession. I keep going to confession. Actually, sometimes the confession becomes part of this habituation, and I fall and I'm in this low place, and I go and receive the Lord's mercy and grace, and I'm elated and I feel like I can fly, and then I fall again, and it's part of this kind of like addictive cycle. How do we break out of that?
Right, so one of the great things about the traditional act of contrition is that it not only expresses remorse over the actual sin and the desire to fight that particular sin, but it also mentions the near occasion.
Mm-hmm.
And the near occasion, it's not just we needed to fill in the rest of the act of contrition so that it would be longer or make it harder for the kids to memorize, but it's actually fundamental to the moral life. The man, the woman, the man who wishes to grow in the moral life actually needs to look at the places, the times, the people which are not in themselves sinful, the computer, a particular relationship, but are certainly an occasion.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Avoiding that near occasion of sin. I think this is actually the most important aspect of being delivered of any sin. It'll often come up with young people, engaged people in particular. Oh, Father, forgive us. I went too far with my fiance, my boyfriend, my girlfriend. I say, okay, so what you need to do, if you're going to be serious about this, if you're really repentant, then the point isn't like, well, we went too far. We were making out, and then no. It didn't. The problem wasn't when you started making out. The problem was when you both went over to his apartment and nobody else was there. And at 10 o'clock at night,
after a couple glasses of wine,
and turned on a movie, and yeah, that was the problem. You put yourself in the near occasion of sin, and if that's been a regular problem, you knew that you put yourself in the near occasion of sin. And actually, here's something that we don't discuss often enough, but to put oneself in the near occasion of grave sin
is
a grave sin. All right? I mean, we knew this was going to happen and we did it anyway. And they say, oh, well, I went too far. It's like, no, you went there. You went into the house. You went into the place. So with pornography, what's the near occasion of sin?
Your phone, your tablet, your television, which is everywhere in your house. You probably have multiple of them. And the high-speed internet and unlimited data that you have on your phone. That's the near occasion. Now, Jesus wasn't joking around when he said in Matthew chapter 7, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off.
And what did he say? What's the context right before that?
Adultery.
He's talking about adultery. He's talking about lust. So whereas he's not literally wanting us to chop off our hands and pluck at our eyes. He is literally wanting us to remove those things that cause us to sin. This is the freedom, actually, because so many times somebody comes to the confessional and they're like, I'm going to try harder this time. This the next time that I feel tempted, I'm just going to overcome it.
I'm going to pray.
I'm going to pray more. Definitely you need prayer, but you don't need prayer in that moment. You need prayer regularly in your life. You need to start your day with mental prayer, meditating on the sacred scriptures, praying the rosary. But even those, if I'm not going to get rid of the avenue for the temptation to come into my house, into my pocket, then I'm not gonna succeed. I'm going to continue to struggle with it. And sometimes, I'm not saying every time, but sometimes deep down, there's actually an unwillingness. Like, I actually don't want to get rid of this sin. So I'm not going to get rid of my phone or put a password on it or anything like that, because I'm okay with it. I've gotten comfortable with this sin. And I can just go to confession every couple of weeks, and that's fine. And
similar to what Oscar Wilde, the great English author, said, he knew that homosexual activity was a sin, and he said, I know this is a sin, which I'll continue to commit. And this is very similar to the Augustine's, give me chastity, but not yet, the great confession within his book, The Confessions. I think some of us just need to come to terms with the fact that we don't want actually to stop sinning. And this is the case of the whole moral life. We're all victims of it, whether it be pornography and masturbation, or excessive drinking, or excessive spending, or gossip. We're all victims. But let's call a spade a spade.
Right.
It's, why give this up? It's pleasurable.
Right.
So if you could, Father, you mentioned with just the need to avoid the near occasion of sin, the reality of getting rid of the device, actually stop using it, cutting off data. What are some other means that we might have?
Yeah, so I mean, we have several levels, right? So sometimes somebody might say, okay, that phone doesn't go into your room with you. You're never alone with your phone. It doesn't go into the bathroom with you. If you're able to do that, then that could be enough. Usually people aren't able to do that because it's so easy, or you forget. Kids in particular, parents, don't let your kids have devices in private places. They're not going to do it on purpose the first time, but they're going to stumble across pornography eventually.
9 years old for boys, about 11 years old for girls, and that number recently dropped. This is the first time a kid's exposed.
Yeah.
9 years old, and even younger.
They don't know, and then they get stuck in this because you've given them a free access to all the pornography out there unknowingly.
Which, by the way, is advertised to children, in particular to young boys.
Yeah. By the way, did you know when they were doing the hearings for Amy Coney Barrett, one of the companies, one of the businesses that spoke against her, they didn't want her, was the pornography industry. Why? Because she's gonna stifle freedom of speech, and she's gonna the pornography industry did not want Amy Coney Barrett to be a Supreme Court justice because they want to keep getting our kids addicted to pornography. It's $1 billion industry. It's insidious. Anyway, okay, so devices in private places.
Could you just settle down, and you're kind of worked up over there? It sounds like you might be talking about something important.
We should be pissed. We should be angry at sin, and we got to bring it out into the light. The devil hates it when it's in the light. So our devices. We can't have our devices in dark places, in private places. Oftentimes that's not enough. We have to put passwords onto our devices, especially for our kids. Do not give them an unprotected device. But even a lot of men that I know, sometimes all that they need is a password on their phone. By the way, the iPhone has the best built-in protective features to it that I've come across. People have Androids. It always seems like there's not a great way. Whereas the iPhone, you can block your web browser, you can block your app store, you can block any other means of getting pornography, and it's all built in. All you need is to have somebody else hold the password. Now, a spouse is usually not the good person to have the password because it's too close of a situation, but a good friend can hold it. And I know guys who that's all they need. There's a password on here, I can't get in. So even if there's that moment of temptation, maybe they try the password, try to guess something a couple times, they can't guess it, and then they give up, and then all the hormones and everything settle back down, and they breathe again. They're like, okay, what was I doing? Okay, I'm glad that password was on there because I didn't fall.
Yeah.
So sometimes the password is enough. There's also software that you can put on. Covenant Eyes is one of the big ones. It'll actually, I think it'll actually blur screens now.
It does.
Yeah. So they're constantly trying to update. So now it's like, even if you bypass everything and you get to a pornographic site, it's blurred. You can't see it. You're stifled, which is what you want. You're thwarted. That's what you want. You want to be thwarted. We can't trust ourselves. Again, we can't be. What did Father Bill Bear always used to say?
We said a lot of things that I would like to, I can say right now. Anyway, that'll be for another conversation.
I think what I heard was, he was the rector at the minor seminary, was you can't be stronger than pornography. You have to be smarter than it. You have to outwit it. So how do I avoid being in contact? If I know there's a big bully who lives down the street, I'm not stronger than him, but I can figure out another way to go. I can outsmart him.
Yeah. Well, two other things that come to me in terms of fighting the fight, and this is another piece of wisdom from Father Bill Bear. He used to say, are you getting enough sleep? And I followed his counsel, especially in the confessional when people confess this. I often ask, are you getting enough sleep? And it's often the case that no. And there's the question of how many hours of sleep we're getting. When we're getting enough sleep, the body is satisfied. But when the body is not satisfied, when it doesn't have the basic in terms of rest, it's going to clamor after the easiest pleasure, which is, aside from another bag of Doritos, it's pornography. And when we get to bed and wake up at the same time every day, that kind of discipline helps us in every other domain of the moral life. It's not as though this is one little part of my life. And this is actually helpful in the moral tradition, that sometimes I can't fight the actual vice head on, but I can fight the other virtues or vices which are around it. And discipline in sleep necessarily leads to discipline in chastity.
Yeah, which is, so Exodus 90, a program that, we've both done at our parishes in the past. That's one of the things, one of the disciplines amongst cold showers and no media and things like that is you gotta get at least 7 hours of sleep every night. And some guys are like, well, I can't. No, you have to. That's not negotiable. You gotta get 7 hours of sleep every night. Yeah.
And as we're talking about the different pieces that can help us, passwords, the regular life of asceticism, I think that the one thing that is really powerful in helping all of us to get out of pornography and masturbation is relationships. It's often the case that we end up in pornography alone, that we're often doing this alone, but it's impossible to get out of alone.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful because what we're really longing for is a relationship, this felt, palpable experience of being with someone. And obviously it's not the same degree, but it's relationship, it's being known, it's being cared for, it's being challenged, is what brings us out of this. And I think that as we look at what helps us to get out of pornography, or even to help us from falling in it in the first place, is the real power of being in relationships.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, again, it's about communion, that longing for communion. So if I'm going to stop having the counterfeit, I actually have to replace it with the real thing. Now, you had said something interesting about the reception of Holy Communion. How is the reception of Holy Communion either helping or hindering my the healing process of pornography?
Well, if you're in the state of grace, it's obviously healing, and go for it. Receive as often as you can. But when we're not in the state of grace, either because of pornography and masturbation or a whole other variety of mortal sins, we're actually not permitted to receive Holy Communion. On one hand, and this is what St. Paul says in his letter to the Corinthians, you're actually heaping condemnation upon yourself for the man who doesn't discern correctly the body. And if I'm not in a state of grace and I receive Holy Communion, I've actually committed yet another grave sin. But think about it like this: the conscience, which is this very basic voice, very deep voice, which says, do this, avoid that. And the well-formed conscience is going to have, that voice is going to be in accord with reality, that I can make a mistake. Sometimes that voice is not correct. like when it tells me to root for the Vikings instead of the Lions. So thank you very much. So, but basically the conscience is saying, do this, avoid that. And the well-formed conscience knows particulars and it knows details. But the thing about receiving Holy Communion when I'm in the state of grave sin is that my conscience is saying, don't. If we take Paul seriously, if we take St. John seriously, that grave sin kills the soul. When the conscience says don't and I act against it, I'm damaging my ability to heed my conscience and I'm making the muscle weaker. So one of the reasons that we can't receive communion in the state of grave sin is because we have to reverence the Lord in the Most Holy Eucharist. But the other reason is because Jesus actually wants to help us get out of this place. And when my conscience says, don't receive, and I obey it, my conscience becomes stronger and my will, cooperating with grace, actually becomes stronger against the sin.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think it prevents against this complacency that builds in too, or even, so if like, oh, well, I'm in the state of mortal sin anyway, might as well commit another one. It's like, well, that's kind of like saying, well, I had an affair, and so my wife's going to be mad at me anyway, I might as well have a couple other affairs while I'm at it. It's like, no, you're walking away from the Lord further and further. It's not a binary sort of thing. But when we receive, when we get complacent and we just receive, then actually when I'm in the state of grace and I receive, it doesn't seem different to me. Intellectually, psychologically, emotionally, it doesn't seem any different to me. Whereas if I've refrained because I knew I had to, well, two things will happen. One, I'm a lot more likely to get to confession quickly.
Yeah.
Shoot, I don't want to not receive, I want to get to confession. But two, I realize the point of the whole thing, wow, I'm in communion with somebody who loves me and who actually has forgiven me and who has overlooked the past things that I've done, and despite all of those continues to come to me. That's the power of communion in the state of grace.
Yeah, that forgiveness is not just a covering of the sin. It's a at times brutal recognition, and even more an affirmation of love. Like, this is the sin, and I love you a lot, and I love you even more because you've brought it to me. This is the power yet again of relationships, and how actually being in the nitty-gritty of confessing my sin to a priest, it's doing such great good, bringing the sin into the light and also establishing me in this communion, this relationship through the priest with the church, with Christ himself. Before we finish, we wanted to speak to each of you, parents, wives, husbands, children. Kyle?
Yeah, so I would say to the men, we really gotta man up. We can't be complacent in this, and it's such an easy sin just to kind of, it doesn't affect that much. It's not like being an alcoholic where everybody knows and it's obviously destroying my life and my family.
But time out. See, that's exactly the insidiousness of the
Right.
sin of pornography, is that oftentimes your wife already has a sense that this is the case because you're less affectionate with her. Women are so perceptive in these ways that they just know when there is an issue in their husband. It's very beautiful. It's great that women have this instinct. They just get a lot of things that men don't. And there's less money in the bank, there's less water in the reservoir for you to love your wife when you're seeking this intimacy with a screen and ultimately with yourself. And there's just a lot of ways where you're not loving your wife because you're orienting this longing, this desire, this powerful drive, which can be so good for your marriage, to yourself. Mm-hmm. Not to mention, there are women who have experienced PTSD upon discovering that their husbands were looking at pornography. About a year ago, I listened to a testimony of a woman, a porn star, who found out. So she this is what she does for a living, and she found out that her boyfriend went to a strip club. And she said, as soon as I found out he went to that strip club and he was looking at another woman, I had no desire for him in terms of intimacy. And this is coming from a woman who's having sex with other men for a living. She's like, if he's looking at other women, I've got no desire for him.
Yeah. To take it seriously, not just because it's hidden in the darkness does not make it something we don't have to work on. And I think sometimes men, if you're not married, you think, oh, when I get married, I'll be able to have sex and then it's all good. It's like, well, no, because now the pornography has distorted your understanding of sex. So really, if you're not married yet, really find healing before you get married, because you're just bringing that into the marriage.
Right. All the more reason that engaged couples, dating couples, you would have a difficult conversation around pornography, because God forbid somebody get blindsided after a few years of marriage with the reality of pornography.
Yeah. But there is hope, and we want to make sure that that's clear. Like, we know men who have found freedom, who have got a victory, but you got to put in the hard work. There's a line in Hebrews which says, "You have not yet resisted sin to the point of shedding your blood." I think that's often true for us. Like, I want to be free of this. I want to be free of this. Do you? How bad? How bad do you want to be free of it? Because the Lord's grace is there, but he's asking a lot of us. He's asking us to shed our own blood.
It reminds me of this great part in The Brideshead Revisited, where Sebastian, who is the main character's Charles Ryder's best friend, they both in their youth lived a life of debauchery, especially Sebastian. Sebastian is sexually promiscuous and is an excessive drinker. But later on in his life, he moves close to a monastery. And Sebastian, he goes out on these binges of drinking, and he returns to the monastery and falls asleep on the porch. And then he has a time of real conversion and living the life of the gospel, and then he falls again. And unfortunately, word it another way, our own struggle with pornography and masturbation can bring us into what is the heart of the gospel, and that is God's forgiveness. We would like that it would be another thing, but that's actually our own pride and our own self-will. I can't overcome this, and I can't stop it. Even though I know I must, I actually have to turn to Jesus for his mercy, and that's the point of the gospel. It's actually surrendering to my weakness and saying, Lord, I can't. And that's actually the best place for us to be. And would that it were another way, but this is what it is. And I think for some of us men, it's actually having to fall, get back up, fall, get back up, that we actually become Christians, real disciples.
Yeah. So let's talk to the women a little. Do we have to talk to women? This isn't a women problem, right?
Actually, it is, and increasingly so. More and more women are looking at pornography.
Yeah, and I think what makes that it's less than men. You know, it's not the highest numbers, but it's still. I mean, we're talking like the difference between 1 and 3 and 2 and 3. You know, but because it's less, and because it's kind of this non-feminine sort of thing, you know, the guys will talk about this in the locker room and share it with each other, and you know, but women keep it so much more hidden than men. Like, it's so much more of a stigma to bring it out than it is for men. So they struggle with it in a different way. And so, I mean, everything we've said so far is equally true. To bring it out into the light, to protect your devices, to take it seriously, and to allow the Lord to speak into your dignity as a woman, as a beloved daughter of the King. He loves you so much, even though you're struggling with something that seems so, unfeminine and gross, and he loves you. He loves you, and he wants to heal you.
Yeah, and that's one part for those who are struggling with pornography. I would also say to all of you spouses and mothers, if and when you discover pornography in the life of your husband or your child, your son, there can be this initial and very strong visceral reaction. And I don't say that that's misplaced. I think that's very healthy, that's very good. But I also see wife, mother, girlfriend, that you want to help those in your life, your husband, your children, to get out of this. And if you can just see how difficult it is to overcome this, and really to look at this with great compassion. This would be for both parents, but I think in particular for women, that if you discover this, yes, take it seriously, but really love your children and love your husband as you discover this.
Yeah, and it's I think why women struggle with this so much is it seems like a personal affront to them in a way that if you found out your husband was addicted to alcohol or something, it would be distressing, but it wouldn't be as personal. But this can really become an addictive sort of thing, and so to try not to take it personally. There's something going on that's beyond, their full control. Now that doesn't give anybody off the hook, right? We've already talked about we got to get rid of devices. We have to take these things seriously. But for the woman to enter into that, the man is so stuck, so clouded, so afraid. We have to give a lot of benefit of the doubt.
Right. And we spoke about devices and passcodes and what we're giving. I mean, I realize that I'm so unpopular for saying this, but parents, does your child really need a cell phone? And
we have a mutual friend who one of their middle schoolers came up to me one time and goes, "Do you know that I'm in the 13% of middle schoolers who don't have a cell phone?" Still doesn't. But he kind of said it with a little bit of angst, but also a little bit of pride. Like, yeah, I'm in the 13%.
So, I mean, we laugh about it, but I'm serious. I mean, parents, do your kids need cell phones? I don't think they do. But
I mean, pornography aside, watch the film The Social Dilemma. It's on Netflix. Your kids are getting addicted to social media and their phones without pornography. Right. They don't need to get addicted to pornography. They're already addicted to their phone. So put these two things together. This is a bad combination.
I love it when he gets passionate. And don't forget that all the Silicon Valley CEOs, where are their kids enrolled in school?
The tech-free schools.
Waldorf. They're in Montessori schools. Why? Because kids don't need screens. Anyway.
And we're living in a screen world. You're watching this and it's turned it. No, well.
Turn it off. If you're under 15, turn this off right now.
But speaking of 15-year-olds, this is all over your high school, everywhere. It's all over your high school, and you have to have the courage and the integrity to say, no, I don't need to see that. I don't look at pornography, because you know what? Your buddy who's showing it to you, he actually doesn't want to be looking at it either. He wishes he wasn't stuck looking at pornography. He wishes that somebody could help him, and the only way that he can cope with this is try to make it like a funny, nonchalant, hey, check this out sort of thing. Don't fall for it. Stick to your guns. It is a mortal sin to intentionally look at pornography. So don't fall into it, and don't let your friends peer pressure you into it, okay?
Yeah, and just staying with the theme of kids, just generally, this is something that you need to bring into the light. And unfortunately, many of us were exposed to pornography at too vulnerable an age. It's tragic because it robs us. You have been robbed, and that your own purity, your own integrity, it is a gift from God, and pornography has actually stripped you of it, no pun intended. And this is a great, great injustice that many of us have suffered, pornography or sexual experiences at a young age.
And that's, sorry, go ahead.
The real fight is actually to bring it into the light.
Yeah.
Is to tell your parents.
Yeah. To tell your parents, especially like when you came across this accidentally, you didn't do anything wrong. You know, somebody showed it to you on the bus, or you're doing a research paper, you're trying to look up a funny video, and then all of a sudden this thing pops up. You didn't do that, but don't hide it. Bring it to your parents. And I tell every parent, I tell parents all the time, your kid they're not allowed to be in trouble for bringing pornography to you. You're not allowed at that point. You can't just like, I'm taking away all your devices. Or like, no, you can start putting passwords on it. You can start having those conversations, but they can't be in trouble. Now, that's, and this is what all the experts say, right? So like pornography has literally been called an epidemic.
Some states have declared it such.
Yeah, public health crisis. And we're living through a pandemic, right? So we know what this is like, and what are we all waiting for? Vaccination. And what does a vaccination do? It takes a little bit of the disease and it injects it into us. We're inoculated with the disease. So you get the COVID vaccination, you're going to be inoculated with a little bit of the virus, so that you're immune to a big portion of the virus. So this is what the experts are saying about pornography too. Even at a young age, we tell our kids about pornography, what it is, not all the details, but enough that they know when they see it. And it might be vague enough that they see a billboard of a lewd dressed woman and say, "Mom, Dad, pornography." Well, actually, yeah, we've been desensitized to that. Right. A woman in her underwear, that's pornography. Let's call it what it is. But if we explain it to our children in a way that they know that that's out there and that it's dangerous and that you want to protect them from it and that they're not in trouble when they tell you that they've seen it, that can save them from getting the deadly virus.
Right. And perhaps we just finish on this note. As unfortunate as it is, we as families need to be having this conversation. That's one of the reasons that we've done this little video for you all, is to make the conversation around pornography and masturbation more common. We're not proposing that you start off Thanksgiving dinner with a robust conversation about pornography, but just in your own way, talking about this. And these are serious things, but what Father and I have so desperately wanted to communicate is how much hope there is, and that wherever sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. Thank you, St. Paul. Thank you, Jesus. And this is the great news, is that integrity, chastity, holiness, it's possible.
Mm-hmm. And that's what Jesus is always referred to, not always, often referred to in the scriptures, the Son of Justice, the light of the world. He comes into our darkness. He comes to illuminate those dark places, to bring the warmth and light of grace. Advent, we're looking forward to the rising of the sun. There is so much hope, so much grace, and that's why we have to talk about it. So, great. Well, if you appreciated this video, share it, like it.
Actually, hold on. That's where you're wrong. I doubt we will get any likes on this video. But I'm glad you listened and watched anyway.
Yeah, later.